All right, let's get right into it. Today we're breaking down a source video that dives deep into the high-stakes negotiations between the US and Iran over in Islamabad, Pakistan. Now, the source material paints a very specific picture of this whole encounter, and we're going to deconstruct exactly how it lays out the events, the people involved, and of course the alleged outcomes.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll set the scene in Islamabad. Then we'll look at how the source compares the two negotiating teams, which is a huge part of its argument. After that, we'll dive into the supposed 10-point agreement, look at all the chaos and commentary happening around the talks, and finally, we'll get to the source's big takeaway from all of it.
Okay, so our story kicks off in Islamabad, Pakistan. And right off the bat, the source video we're analyzing establishes this atmosphere of huge importance. It portrays these talks not as just some routine meeting, but as a genuine turning point, something with massive consequences for the global balance of power. The source really paints a vivid picture of the Iranians' arrival. It describes the delegation as walking in with, supreme confidence. They're not just getting a simple diplomatic hello, they're being greeted by the Pakistani military. The video even uses phrases like conquering heroes and victors of the war to describe the scene, really driving home this image of a powerful, triumphant delegation.
Now, let's see how the source really builds its case, because a huge piece of its argument comes down to who is actually in the room for these talks. It presents this narrative of a dramatic mismatch right from the get-go.
And wow, when you see it laid out like this, you can really see the stark contrast the source is trying to draw. On one side, you have Iran's team, which is portrayed as this powerhouse of veteran diplomats. We're talking top national security advisors, foreign policy experts, parliamentarian leaders. Then you look at the U.S. team, and it's described as much smaller, a lot less conventional, and critically, without the Secretary of State. The source makes a real point of highlighting that one of the members was a real estate developer.
And this leads directly to the source's first big conclusion. Based on that huge difference it sees between the delegations, the video just comes right out and says that the very posture of the negotiation signals one of two things. Either the U.S. wasn't taking these talks seriously, or it was already conceding defeat.
So let's get into the actual deal itself, because according to the source, these negotiations weren't about two sides meeting in the middle. The claim is that this was about formalizing terms that Iran had already laid out, and that the U.S. had reportedly accepted these terms before anyone even sat down at the table.
So the crucial point is, what were those terms? Well, the source lists a series of massive concessions. Iran gets to keep control of the Strait of Hormuz, it keeps its missile and drone programs, it can continue enriching uranium, and it gets security guarantees for itself and its allies. And if that wasn't enough, all economic sanctions and UN resolutions against Iran would be removed, and the country would get full reparations. Now, to add a little more weight to its claims, the source brings in some analysis from a regional intelligence officer, Danny Citron. He's quoted as saying that these talks weren't about de-escalation at all. He frames them as a strategic opportunity for Iran to basically lock in its recent gains and make its new dominant position in the region official.
The source then kind of zooms out, arguing that these negotiations didn't just happen in a vacuum. It points to military actions happening at the same time, and maybe most importantly, to social media commentary that it says gives you all the context you need to understand the U.S. administration's approach here.
And this slide really shows you just how volatile the whole environment was, according to the source. While these critical talks are happening, it highlights reports of Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, plus U.S. intelligence claiming China might be sending advanced weapons to Iran. And then, smack in the middle of all of this, Donald Trump starts posting on social media.
The source argues that these social media posts weren't just some random side note. No, it presents them as the main negotiating tactic being used by the U.S. at this incredibly critical moment. So let's take a look at what was actually posted. So here's the first post this source highlights. The message is super optimistic, right? It says U.S. crude exports are about to boom to help out these Hormuz-starved markets. The source video then immediately pushes back on this, basically arguing that this shows a total misunderstanding of how a supply shock in the Strait of Hormuz would ripple through the entire global oil market, including gas prices right here in the U.S.
And to back up that critique, the source presents this data. It points to a 21.2% spike in U.S. gas prices, and then shows that during one 24-hour period, a grand total of 0 oil tankers passed through the Strait of Hormuz. 0. It directly contradicts that optimistic social media post and paints a very different economic picture.
And this is the second post the source really focuses on. It paints a picture of Iran as having no cards, saying their only choice is to negotiate.
The source presents this as just a complete disconnect from reality, arguing that Iran actually held all the cards, having supposedly already gotten the U.S. to agree to its 10-point framework.
So after laying all of this out, the scene, the mismatched teams, the deal, the social media commentary, the source pulls all these different threads together to give its final, pretty blunt assessment of the whole thing. The source lays out this step-by-step narrative of the U.S. position. It highlights claims from Trump that Iran's military was gone, that the Strait of Hormuz would just open up automatically, and that we don't need a backup plan. And then it contrasts all of that with a quote it attributes to former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who allegedly said Trump was panicking and would take literally any deal he could get. And this brings us right to the source's bottom line. It does not mince words here. Based on everything it presented, the delegations, the framework, the public statements, the video concludes that these negotiations were nothing less than a total and utter surrender by the United States. So the source material we've just unpacked presents a narrative of a massive diplomatic failure, a moment where one side supposedly achieved everything it wanted. And it really leaves us with a huge question to think about. If this portrayal is accurate, what are the long-term ripple effects when the geopolitical landscape shifts that dramatically? That's definitely some food for thought.